Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 14th of October of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the course direction where the Russians continue their counter-offensive operation, and during the previous 24 hours the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. Let's discuss in details. The Ukrainians during the day were trying to slow the Russians down, trying to counterattack the Russian forces with a significant number of FPV drone attacks, but the Ukrainians currently do have a lot of problems with this type of forces, because I'll remind you that 2 days ago the pro-Ukraine mappers Deep State published the video, published the photo how the 10th or 9 or 10th Ukrainian FPV drone operators were captured by the Russians. The Ukrainians later stated that those operators were destroyed. We haven't received anything that can confirm this, but anyway, the Ukrainians do have some problems with this type of weapon. And as for the modern warfare, this is the most important type of weapon. FPV drone operators during the local clashes and small battles like the Sudzha direction. Now let's talk about the village of Lyubimovka. As you can see, we have changes on the ground, and the changes are very important. And now we have 100% sure information. We have no doubts that the Ukrainians on the territory of Lyubimovka in the southern part, in the eastern part, and the northeastern part are encircled. During the previous 24 hours, we have the video from the southern part. This is the village by the name of Tolstoluch. The Russians managed to take the village under complete control. This information was confirmed either both by pro-Russian sources and both by video. In this video we can see, this is a very long video, 7 minutes. If you have access to map, you can always take a look the entire video. In this video we can see the Russian offensive operation exactly in the southern part of this settlement, and as a result of clashes the Russians managed to take under control the village. The Russians were attacking something like this. They were moving from the west. They were moving first in the direction of Pokrovsky, then through Pokrovsky in the direction of the northeastern part of the village of Zelený Lug. So based on this video we have adjusted the map. Later during the day we got another video that shows us the Russian attack towards the village of Lyubimovka from the northern part. Let's take a look at this video. And this is a very interesting video because the Russians published not just the video itself, but also the Russians published the route of how the Russian forces were moving. As you can see in the top left corner, we can see a small screen, and we can see two vehicles, two personnel carriers that were moving very fast towards the Ukrainian positions in the village of Lyubimovka. In the right corner, we can see the village of Lyubimovka itself, and we can see a red line that shows how the Russians were moving. And based on this video, based on this road, it was very easy to geolocate every single point and to understand where exactly the Ukrainians, where the Russians were attacking, where exactly the Russians landed their infantry and so on. And summarizing everything, the Russians attacked the village of Lyubimovka, and the Russians landed their infantry exactly in this point. And once again, based on this video, we have adjusted the map also in Russian favor. So summarizing everything, in this case the Russians were moving something like this. So we understand that the village of Lyubimovka was took in pincers. So we are not saying that there are thousands of Ukrainians. According to information we have, there are just up to 1 battalion, but obviously this battalion is no longer able to evacuate or to escape this cauldron. Most likely they have just few options, either to surrender or to stay there forever. So this is the situation in this direction. Let's discuss the situation in the vicinity of Zelený Shlях and Nova Ivanovka. As for this territory, we haven't received anything that can confirm additional progress on the ground of the armored force of Russian Federation, but we have different mappers and some telegram posts of the soldiers who has connections with the soldiers on the ground. And the sources are saying that both the village of Nova Ivanovka and the village of Leonidovo were liberated by the Russians during the previous 24 hours. So summarizing everything, currently the Russians took under control Nova Ivanovka and Leonidovka, and according to pro-Russian sources there are very heavy clashes for the village by the name of Alexandria. Summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that everything that located inside of this red line is already under complete Russian control, and this is very important progress because the Russians, as you can see, are moving along the road Zelený Shlях, Viktorovka. So this is, as I understand, the main priority of the armed force of Russian Federation, and we can understand this because if you remember, just 3 or 4 days ago, the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to take under control the village of Novaya Sorochina. This happened on the 9th of October, so up to 5 days ago, and after that, that was, by the way, according to the classification, our classification, the beginning of Russian counteroffensive. Then we got a lot of changes on the ground, a lot of confirmations, and now we see that the Russians are about to create another cauldron for the Ukrainians, for those Ukrainians who are currently located in the village of Volgovka, in the village of Matveevka, to the south of the village by the name of Kremenoye, in Pogribki, Orlovka. So we are talking about these significant territories because as for now, the current distance between edge Russian positions in the village of Leonidovka and Russian edge positions in the village of Novaya Sorochina is around 6 kilometers, which is obviously already nothing. The Ukrainians most likely during the next few days, if the situation continue developing the same way, most likely they will decide to fall back because when talking about Lyubimovka, just one battalion was encircled. As for Olgovka, another battalion was encircled. But when talking about these fields and these square kilometers, most likely up to 1 or 1.5 brigade might be encircled by the Russians if they finish this maneuver. The only thing the Russians need is to take under control Staraya Sorochina and to improve their positions further in the direction of Kruglenkovo. So if the Russians are able to reduce the distance for another 30-40%, this is going to be the end for the Ukrainians that are currently located in this area. Now let's move further. We have some changes on the ground in Ukrainian favor. Today the Russian sources published the video of how the Russians were after withdrawing the Ukrainians in the vicinity of the village by the name of Martinovka. It's not like Ukrainian gains, it's just adjustments on map based on the geolocation we received. Most likely the Ukrainians captured this territory a long time ago, but just now we got real proofs of that. Now let's move further. In the southeastern direction, the Russians also continued their offensive, and according to information we have, Cherkasskaya Konopelka, this small village, was recaptured by the Russians. Telling the truth, since the beginning of the battle for Kursk, we haven't received even a single video from Ukrainian side that can confirm Ukrainian control over the settlement. So that's why, since the beginning of the Kursk Ukrainian offensive, this area between Milovoye, Kurilovka, and Cherkasskaya Konopelka is colored as contested area. So this is very interesting and weird. And now the sources reported that the Russians managed to regain their positions. Anyway, despite the fact whether the Russians managed to do this or not, we still haven't received anything that can confirm Russian control over Plyokhova, which means that there are still very heavy clashes between the armed forces of Ukraine and the armed forces of Russian Federation. The Ukrainians understand the value of Plyokhova, they understand the value of Guyeva, because if the Ukrainians lose this ground, then the Ukrainians might be encircled by the Russians within the next few weeks. Now let's move further and let's talk about the northern Kupiansk direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. As for the previous 24 hours, we haven't received any posts, any updates whether the Russians managed to improve their positions on the ground or not. We've been receiving just the videos of how the Russians were bombing this territory heavily, trying to deal as many as possible damage to the armed forces of Ukraine. We know that currently Ukrainians have significant problems with logistics. Main pontoon bridges were destroyed during the previous days. The Ukrainians have poor logistics, poor supply and support, and basically the Ukrainians are ambushed and stuck in this area. Obviously the Ukrainians understand this well, that they have no chances to evacuate Ukrainian garrison from this side of the river of Oskol, so that's why they will fight till the end. On the other hand, I'll remind you that Zelensky is planning to conduct another wave of mobilization. It's not like he's not going to conduct this. He has already begun doing this. We start receiving the significant number of videos of how Ukrainians, just regular Ukrainians, being captured and by the Ukrainian, let's say, recruiters and being sent to some military camps and so on. So during the next days, we're going to see more and more videos of the type, because Zelensky understands understand that he doesn't have much time. Today we also got report about some allies and joining the special military operation by the Korean forces. We also got lots of updates about that, so that's why Zelensky is out of time and he needs to mobilize as many as possible during the next few days, just to stay on the safe side until during at least the winter period of the special military operation. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the southern Kupiansk direction. The Russians continue pressure, but the main problem for the Russians right now is Ukrainian garrison that is currently located between the villages of Makievska and Nevska. According to different mappers, this territory was already colored in Russian favor, but according to the situation, to the sources that are familiar with the situation on the ground, there are still Ukrainians up to 1 battalion of 66 mechanized brigade of the armored forces of Ukraine, and now the Russians are trying to destroy this cauldron and to force the Ukrainians to fall back. But it's very difficult to do because there is a river, the river of Zherebets, and basically the Ukrainians gonna have very big problems if they begin retreating. As for the Sivers direction, we haven't received anything, just regular updates of how the Russians were bombing and attacking Ukrainian positions. We got updates about counter-artillery duels, but nothing special, nothing that can clarify the current status of Vyimka, either of Vyimka or Verkhnekamenska or Grigorovka. Now let's move to the Chasiv Yar direction, and the Russians, as I understand, began the full-scale offensive operation because the biggest number of updates is coming exactly from this territory. Let's start from the northern direction. According to pro-Ukrainian mappers, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions to the southwest of the village by the name of Grigorovka. During the next few days, most likely the Russians will try to finish the battle for this side, for this part of Grigorovka region, and for this side of Seversky Donetsk Donbass Canal, trying to take everything under control along this red line. And as soon as the Russians are able to do this, then the Russians most likely will cross Seversky Donetsk Donbass Canal and they will begin moving in the Chasiv Yar direction from the north. Furthermore, we can see lots of updates of how the Russians are bombing edge Ukrainian positions also along the line of combat contact. As you can see, a few more FABs arrived right in front of Russian positions in the central of Chasiv Yar, which means that the Russians are planning to begin full-scale offensive also during the next few days. And the most important updates are coming from the southeastern part of the city of Chasiv Yar. The Russian sources published the video of how the Russian troopers were moving on the Ukrainian side of the Seversky Donetsk Donbass Canal. We have a lot of geolocations, a lot of episodes. The Russians basically are feel free in this area without any risks, without being afraid of anything or being attacked from the Ukrainian side. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map. Later we got additional confirmations from different mappers, including pro-Ukrainian and neutral mappers. The Russians managed to improve their position significantly, and most likely this temporary deployment point and this stronghold was captured by the Russians. Telling the truth, I believe that currently the Russians control everything that is located inside of this red line, including this stronghold and this part of the stronghold and this piece of stronghold. So most likely this entire bridgehead is already under complete Russian control, and the Russians are ready to begin moving further in the direction of Chasiv Yar from the southeast. We have a lot of geolocations of how the Russians were bombing the Ukrainian positions on possible main attack roads in the southeastern part and in the southwestern part. Once again, the Russians are using FAB 100, FAB 250, 500, 1500. Furthermore, I'll remind you that Zelensky during the previous days reported that since the beginning of the previous week, the Russians have used more than 800 FABs all over the entire line of combat contact. The number is significant, obviously. Also, as you can see, we have lots of geolocations on the line between the village of Klishchievka and the city of Donetsk. A lot of geolocations. The Russians intensified their artillery and aviation activity. The Ukrainian positions are being bombed heavily, and most likely this is something like artillery preparation before the beginning of the full-scale offensive. Furthermore, we've been discussing this for many days, that according to different pro-Ukrainian military experts and different Western military experts, that the Russians are about to begin the biggest offensive operation. Sometimes I have questions as well where the Russians are getting so many forces and so many strengths to continue and to begin another full-scale offensive operation before the finishing and the end of the previous full-scale offensive. Sometimes I don't have answers to these questions. Anyway, the Russians are about to finish the battle for the city of Donetsk, because today, for the first time since the beginning of the battle for the citadel, the Russians began bombing and attacking with its TOS flamethrower systems the final citadel in the northern part of the city of Donetsk. So we're talking about these several attacks, and if the Russians began using TOS flamethrower systems, and I'll remind you that the range of this multiple launch rocket system is limited by 6 kilometers, which means that the Russians are very close. And the most important, that the Russians are not afraid of being attacked by FPV drones from Ukrainian side within this 6 kilometers distance, which means that the territory was already secured around, and the use of TOS flamethrower systems is always the beginning of offensive, because this is very powerful and very heavy artillery system. As for the city of Donetsk, the Ukrainians during the previous days conducted several counter-attacks on the Russian positions. We have a lot of geolocations the day before yesterday, a lot of FPV drone strikes. Very difficult to understand what the Ukrainians were planning to do, but as for now we don't have anything that can confirm that Ukrainians managed to restore control. Maybe the Ukrainians were trying to ruin the Russian attempts to attack the Donetsk Vuhilya, the mine and the landfill, but we don't know the results of those attacks and those attempts. Now let's move to the Pokrovsk direction, where the Russians managed to improve their positions around the city of Selidova and to the west of Novogrodovka. We have geolocations, we have videos that confirm Russian additional progress on the ground. This is the first video where we can see Russian personnel carrier and motorcycle that were moving towards the Russian edge positions in the village of Lisovka. The video doesn't have very good quality, but anyway, the Russians were moving through the fields from the southeast to the northwest, and as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to land exactly in this point, and the battle for the Lisivka continued. As for the southern direction, we have also changes on the ground in the northeastern part of Selidova based on this video. In this video, we can see destroyed and burned Russian tank that most likely was attacked by the Ukrainian anti-tank missile or something like this. Furthermore, the Russian sources continue reporting that currently the Russians are moving very fast along the railways from the village of Tsukurina in the direction of the village by the name of Vishneva. We don't have any changes on the ground, just maybe the rumors or wishful thinking, but we've been receiving the updates of the type probably since the beginning of the previous weeks. Obviously something big is happening, and if one day the Russians are able to confirm the Russian presence on the outskirts of Vishneva, this is going to be the biggest cauldron ever since the beginning of the special military operation, after the city of Mariupol, of course. As for Gornyak, we haven't received anything, as you can see, during the previous 24 hours. Most likely the Ukrainians realized their situation with their deaths or leaving roads, the significant number of geolocations of how the Russians were destroying vehicles along the line between Shevchenka and Gornyak made the Ukrainians to think and to change their roads for supply and support their forces, and the Ukrainians decided to move their supply roads from the northern part of Kurakhova water reservoir to the southern part, and during the previous 24 hours the main FPV drone attacks took place, the main concentration of Russian FPV drone attacks took place exactly in this area. The significant number of video has been published by the Russians for the previous day. A lot of attacks. Once again, the Russians were bombing vehicles, light vehicles, different trucks. Then when after another attack, another drone arrived to check the results of the previous attack. Then that drone was used again. Another drone came to replace. So the thing is that the Russians are working like a big machine, like a big mechanism, and that works perfectly. It works perfectly, as you can see. I'm talking about these new Russian tactics with a significant number of drones that they're used to attack Ukrainians who are trying to move anywhere in the vicinity of Kurakhova. So this is the situation in this direction. As for the South Donetsk direction, we'll also receive lots of updates, and we have changes on the ground. As you can see, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the north of Vuhledar, and the Russians managed to answer the village of Katerinovka. At least as for the village of Katerinovka, this information was confirmed by the video that was published by 79th Air Mobile Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine. We can see the significant number of vehicles that were destroyed by the Ukrainians. As for the northern Vuhledar progress, it's just a report from pro-Ukrainian mappers. Anyway, the most important thing that I would like to discuss with you is that currently we have just 2 weeks left for active offensives from the Russian side. The Ukrainians need to hold their positions just for another 2 weeks, because in 2 weeks the rainy period of time is going to come. And then for another month, probably till the mid-November or till the late November, we're not going to see big Russian offensive through the fields, big breakthroughs somewhere in the northern Kupiansk direction. Most likely during the next months, when the rainy period of time is going to come on the territory of Ukraine, the Russians will have progress just on the ground in the cities and towns like Selidova, Donetsk, Chasov probably Kurakhova. So this is exactly what the Russians are doing right now. They understand that there's going to be a period of time up to 1 month when they won't be able to move through fields, when they won't be able to attack the Ukrainians around Sudzha, because the quality of surface will not allow the Russians doing this. So that's why the Russians during the previous few months were making just one thing: to take control under the first streets and first buildings of agglomerations and towns like Gornyak Kurachovka, like Selidova, like Mirnograd, like Donetsk, like the Chasov Yar, and so on. So if you have let's say stable, strong positions in Mirnograd, this will allow you, regarding the weather, regarding the climate, regarding the quality of surface, to move between streets from building to building. So this is very important. As I understand, during the winter period of time, there are going to be clashes not just for one settlement, as we used to see just one battle for Bakhmut or one battle for Avdiivka. During the winter period of time, the Russians most likely will storm up to 10 settlements, big towns all over the entire territory of Ukraine, starting from the south, Zaporozhye or South Donetsk direction, and ending maybe with the city of Sudzha in the Kursk area. Now let's move to Zaporozhye. The second day in a row, or the third day in a row, or maybe the second week in a row, we are receiving updates that the Russians either have concentrated a significant number of forces or have already launched an offensive operation. So anyway, summarizing everything, we have just FPV drone strikes from this territory, but summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that the Russians either preparing something here, or they're trying to attract Ukrainian attention and to force the Ukrainians to keep additional forces and reserves exactly in this area. Currently, we don't know for sure what is happening, but something big might happen very, very soon. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.